Cause, a principle, aim, or movement that because of a deep commitment, one is prepared to defend or advocate. Karibu. Karibu is a Kiswahili word that means welcome. Welcome, you found yourself in a peaceful place, a place where you can grow and develop, and we hope grow and develop to your fullest potential. The Cause Podcast is a space for you to be like George Clinton and Parliament Funkadelic when they say, free your mind and your bottom will follow. This is a podcast that we hope will expand your mind and raise your consciousness. Welcome to The Cause. Conversations on music, history, and democracy. Class is in session, so come and get your lesson. Welcome to the second episode of the Cause Podcast. Today, we're going to be discussing my brand new book, The Funk Movement, subtitled Music, Culture, and Politics. This, like all of my works, was a labor of love. Really, this is a book that I wrote to fill a void. I feel like a lot of other forms of Black popular music get a lot of love. They get a lot of attention. In fact, I would argue that they are lavished with attention. Jazz studies is brimming. Hip-hop studies is brimming and spilling over. Even blues and rhythm and blues studies. But, I mean, funk doesn't get a lot of love. And one of the problems when we come to funk studies, there's a tendency to only focus on men, as if it was only men who were creating funk music. And so this book is like an alternate history, if you will, of funk. I think it would be a great introduction to funk music because not only do you get full chapters devoted to James Brown, Sly Stone, and George Clinton, who are considered the great trinity, if you will, of funk music. But I also throw some curveballs at my readers by including chapters on Chaka Khan and Betty Davis. And the chapters on Chaka Khan and Betty Davis actually connect their funk to what I'm calling a Black musical feminism. And on the one hand, and on the other hand, I'm calling it Black feminist funk. And so it connects that work to this thing called the Black Women's Liberation Movement, another unsung movement. So a lot of my work revolves around connecting Black popular music to Black protest movements. And so this book continues it, essentially arguing that the funk movement was a sub-movement within the overarching Black Power movement. That most people don't realize that the Black Power movement wasn't simply a political movement, it was also a cultural arts movement. And they created this thing called the Black aesthetic within the Black Power movement, and the Black aesthetic yielded or helped to birth the funk aesthetic. And the funk aesthetic didn't just, it wasn't just prevalent in the music, it was in the way people dressed, talked, walked. I mean, it was a lifestyle. And so that's why by the time we get to the chapter on George Clinton and Parliament Funkadelic, you can see that funk was its own philosophy, right? So this is why George Clinton would come through and talk about Chocolate City. He would come through and talk about, Afronauts. I mean, when I was a kid, I just thought, wow, Black astronauts are called Afronauts, and today, a lot of that music will be called Afrofuturist. And everything, but essentially this book could also be called Introduction to Funk Studies. It's a new way to study funk by connecting it to the larger social and political movements that were going on at the time, the funk movement. First chapter, Black is Beautiful. Subtitled The Black Power Movement, the Black Arts Movement, and the Black Aesthetic. Essentially, this chapter provides a broad overview of the Black Power movement and its cultural arts offshoot, the Black Arts Movement. Without critically understanding the Black Power movement and the Black Arts movement, as well as the ways that the Black aesthetic virtually influenced everything brought into and emerging out of the Black Power movement, it is almost impossible to grasp classic funk music and the funk movement. During its heyday, funk was, among other things, the unsanctioned sound of primarily Black ghetto youth expressing not only their loves and lusts, but also their discontent with both American democracy and the increasingly placid moderatism of the civil rights movement. Serving as a major mouthpiece for the rhetoric, the politics, and aesthetics of the Black Power movement, funk music sought to decolonize and repoliticize Black popular music, if not Black people, more generally speaking. Essentially mirroring the Black Power movement's efforts to radicalize African American politics in the aftermath of, let's call it, the mixed results and mostly disappointing outcomes of the civil rights movement, the funk movement represented a radicalization and, truth be told, an Africanization, or as Malcolm X would say, a Blackenization of Black popular music in the 1960s and 1970s. Because of the often overtly political nature of a lot of funk music, and considering the ways that all post-funk Black popular music drew from classic funk aesthetics and Black Power movement politics, it is incredibly important to understand the larger social, political, cultural landscape that funk music and the funk movement emerged in. Consequently, this chapter, this very first chapter, will provide snapshots of the history of the Black Power movement, the Black Arts movement, and the Black aesthetic to historically and culturally ground readers in the ideals and ethos of the era that funk music and the funk movement rose to prominence. People are going to be scared of this thing called the Black Power movement. Some people are going to be scared of this thing called a Black Arts movement. Some people, again, scratching their head, what is the Black aesthetic? Those kinds of things. And so it's that triad. Again, as a musician, it was important for me to capture those three cultural and aesthetic concepts. It was really important for me to capture those as like a point of departure. So to really understand this music, you need to understand some things about Black history, Black culture, and Black social movements at the time. It's not like the music exists in a vacuum. Chapter 2, Pre-Funk, the prelude to funk, subtitle Hard Bop Jazz and the Cultural Roots of Funk Music and the Funk Movement. So essentially, Chapter 2 offers readers an overview of the prehistory of funk. Now, I know that's a mouthful. The prehistory of funk and Black popular music and Black popular culture. This chapter discusses the important etymology of the word funk and its utilization and popularization by hard bop jazz musicians between the mid-1950s and the mid-1960s, approximately a decade prior to the beginning of the classic funk era, which took place between the mid-1960s and the late 1970s. What's unique about this is that I'm actually discussing the prehistory of funk, that what we're calling funk was only the latest iteration in the 1960s and the 1970s of this thing called funk music. Probing the ways hard bop jazz musicians incorporated elements of gospel, blues, jump blues, and rhythm and blues into their music, the chapter is essentially a sonogram of funk and the funk aesthetic in its infancy. It concludes with the discussion of hard bop jazz funk as civil rights movement funk and classic funk, well, the classic funk of James Brown, Sly Stone, and George Clinton, among others, as Black Power movement funk. So again, some people only know about the funk of the Black Power movement, and they don't know about the funk of the civil rights movement. I feel like that's a major contribution the book makes. Chapter 3, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. Subtitle, James Brown and the Foundations of Funk. This chapter argues that James Brown was both a musical and cultural leader during the Black Power movement / funk movement era. Key topics covered in this chapter include Brown's revolutionary rerouting of rhythm and blues in gospel, blues, jazz, and African rhythms during his famous pre-funk period. Next, his song Papa's Got a Brand New Bag is discussed as a major turning point in the history of Black popular music in general and the history of funk in particular. Brown's emphasis on rhythm over melody and proto-rap style chanting over Motown Black pop style singing is treated as the genesis of and a major foundation for classic funk. His immortal Black Power anthem, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud, is examined for both its musical and cultural impact on Black America. Arguably, more than any other song, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud demonstrates that funk was both a form of music and an extra musical movement preoccupied with Black life, Black love, and Black liberation. Man, when I think about James Brown, I think about somebody who revolutionized Black popular music. I think about somebody who started out singing gospel, who obviously was an incredible drummer and organist with a lot of jazz leanings. I think about somebody whose idol was Louis Jordan, right? The king of jump blues. And James Brown really remixed a lot of jump blues and created this thing called, rhythm and blues. He really added some more earthy, more organic elements with those screams and shouts and grunts and groans. And as a young drummer growing up, the first time I ever heard James Brown say, "Get a drummer some. Can you, Jabbo, can y'all get a drummer some? Let the drummer get some." It was like electricity went through my body. I felt illuminated hearing James Brown articulate, like really polyrhythm in a very sort of African-American fashion. This wasn't African music. Oh, no. This was African-American music, and we called it rhythm and blues. If you think about the R, as my grandmama would say, the aura in R&B, that stands for rhythm, and often what we are calling rhythm in the term rhythm and blues is actually polyrhythm. That's James Brown's major contribution. And James Brown's adding sort of that polyrhythmic element to rhythm and blues. That's how he birthed funk. It's a musical conception. He musically conceived or helped to musically conceive a whole new form of Black popular music. In fact, where a lot of other R&B artists was focusing on melody and harmony, James Brown was focusing on rhythm. And he was making all these different rhythms bump in there together, a lot of bumping and jumping. And if you ever sat in your bed and closed your eyes and listened to James Brown, I'm sorry. In fact, you probably couldn't just sit in your bed and lay in your bed and do it. It's going to make you, you might Mississippi sidewalk, you might Watusi, you might Boogaloo, you might sit up there and do the camel walk. But some of y'all probably don't know nothing about those dances. Now, do ya? Nobody with a heart and a soul can sit still when James Brown come on. I'm sorry, though. I've seen people, even if they on the offbeat and boulder, bless their hearts, you still cannot sit still and listen to James Brown. And in that sense, James Brown is also a voice, not simply for Black America, but for America. He is one of those great stories. If you read the chapter, he's one of those stories where somebody who was abandoned by his mother and then ultimately abandoned by his father, like Billie Holiday, he sort of comes of age in a brothel situation. And he really sort of makes something out of nothing. And in that sense, James Brown is emblematic of the African-American experience, that literally we came here through the Middle Passage, shackles and chains, and look at what we've created. Look at this triumph over tragedy. That's what I hear when I hear funk music. In fact, somewhere in the book, I argue that funk is one of the most African of African-American musics. I just dropped the mic. It's over. Chapter 4. Class is in session. So come and get your lesson. Woo! All right. Chapter 4. There's a riot going on. Subtitle: Sly and the Family Stones, Psychedelic Rock, Psychedelic Soul, and Invention of Psychedelic Funk. This chapter explores Sly and the Family Stones' creation of psychedelic funk by mixing Motown and Stax styled soul with James Brown's funk and Jimi Hendrix's psychedelic rock. Yes, excuse me while I kiss. Although they began with a pop rock funk sound that drew heavily from Motown and the 1960s San Francisco Bay Area rock scene with A Whole New Thing, that was their first album. By the time they released Dance to the Music and soon afterwards Stand, Sly and the Family Stone not only helped shift black popular music from soul to funk, but they also made major extra musical contributions to the funk movement by featuring 2 black women, Cynthia Robinson on trumpet and Sly's sister Rose Stone on piano, 2 white men, Jerry Martini on saxophone, and Greg Enrico on drums, and 3 black men, Sly Stone on piano, organ, guitar, bass, harmonica, etc., Larry Graham on bass, and Sly's little brother, Freddie Stone, on guitar. Chicken scratch, y'all. As a genre-jumping, mixed-gender, interracial funk band, Sly and the Family Stone symbolize both the black pride and embrace of universalism at the heart of the funk movement. Their music was influenced by and served as a soundtrack for both the Black Power movement and the hippie movement. But it did not fit nicely and neatly into either camp. In this chapter, Sly and the Family Stone's music is reinterpreted as not merely popular funk music, but also an expression of the funk aesthetic and the funk movement, as distinct from, even as it boldly built on and overlapped with, the black aesthetic and the Black Power movement. When I think about Sly Stone in particular, I think I've always had an affinity for him because he was born in Denton, Texas, right outside of Dallas, Texas, on March 15th, 1943. I mean, gosh, one of the great trinity of funk comes from Texas. I mean, and he doing some toe jam funk. I mean, like booger nose funk. I mean, like, ooh, stanky gym socks after LeBron done won the championship funk. I mean, this is the funkiest funk, I mean, that you can possibly, I better stop. Yeah, Sly and the Family Stone. And the fact that, for me, there's this kind of radical humanism that Sly brings to the funk aesthetic. Also, there's a kind of gender politics. I'm not saying he had perfect gender politics, but I'm saying the fact that his sisters, you know, had this gospel group and they were pressing Big Brother to be in the band, you know, and everything, and that it was sort of a mixed gender and an interracial funk group. I think that just showed the possibilities of funk music was one of the first post-civil rights movement forms of black popular music, along with soul, you know, which also sort of nodded to some of the soul artists and funk artists, you know, that we call white chocolate. You know, somebody like a Dusty Springfield and a Van Morrison, right? I could go on and on and on with some of these white artists who were as influenced by the soul aesthetic and the funk aesthetic as black artists were. And so essentially there's a part of the book that says that soul music and funk music were emblematic of a kind of sonic desegregation, that essentially American society was still racially segregated, and there was a whole generation of youth who were using their music as a form of desegregation. Obviously, I wrote a whole chapter on this in my book called Black Power Music, where I argue that Motown did a lot to help with desegregation, and that it's a sonic signature of the desegregation impulse free-floating through black America in the 1960s and the 1970s. The baby boomer generation used elements of their music to critique and comment on what was happening in society at the time, something that was picked up and we ran with for the hip hop movement. But just think about it. Jimi Hendrix and Sly and the Family Stone both played Woodstock. You know, most people only, Carlos Santana, Richie Havens, they played Woodstock, right? Just think about like how at a time where it wasn't just sort of like the iconic white male rockers, but there were some different things that were going on, and a lot of those folks were our parents, right? And so it's a beautiful thing the way Richie Havens was able to improvise there. Like, you know, people was running late, people was too high to perform, and he got out there. And I also think that that was part of, for me, I also thought about some of my ancestors on plantations playing those banjos, you know, when they would have big parties and balls and galas, and they would say, go down there to the quarters and get old Jeb to play the banjo and everything. And it's having to perform this music as a form of not simply artistic expression, but cultural expression, spiritual expression, even intellectual expression. I mean, there's some deep philosophical concepts by the time we get to the next chapter on Parliament Funkadelic. P-Funk actually has its own philosophy. And so this is something I'm really, really excited about. Let's go directly into it. Chapter 5, One Nation Under a Groove. Subtitle, George Clinton, Parliament Funkadelic, Psychedelic Rock, Psychedelic Soul, and Psychedelic Funk. I mean, one of the things that stood out to me was the first time I saw the album cover for One Nation Under a Groove. And I saw that red, black, and green flag on the album cover. And, you know, that's the African-American national flag, you know, red, black, and green. And I just thought, wow. I mean, it was on the album cover. That was just insane. I was like, what's up? So anyway, we're talking about the funk movement. The 5th chapter argues that even more than James Brown and Sly Stone, it was George Clinton and Parliament Funkadelic, a.k.a. P-Funk, who went the furthest in founding a funk nation for the characteristically nonconformist and anti-establishment members of the funk movement. For Clinton and P-Funk, the funk movement was neither a fantasy nor a metaphor, but a much-needed alternative, an alternate reality for Black America in the 1970s. Check this out. With songs about metaphysical forces, funketeers, maggot brains, cosmic slop, nappy dugouts, outer space, Afronauts, UFOs, chocolate cities, motherships, flash nights, Dr. Funkenstein, and an underwater world where funky people can finally be free. That's off the album Motor Booty Affair. Clinton and P-Funk were the preeminent Pied Pipers of funk between the mid to late 1970s. Major points of discussion in this chapter include Funkadelic's creative combination of James Brown's funk, Jimi Hendrix's psychedelic rock, and Sly Stone's psychedelic soul. There is also an extended exploration of Parliament's black radio-friendly psychedelic soul funk, with particular attention given to their classic albums Chocolate City and Mothership Connection. Mothership Connection in specific is analyzed as a form of Afro-futurist funk. Yes, I said it. Afro-futurist funk, preoccupied with musical, spiritual, sexual, cultural, social, and political freedoms. A recurring theme, freedom, throughout Clinton and P-Funk's repertoire, their au revoir. The chapter ends with a reappraisal of Funkadelic's One Nation Under a Groove as a declaration of funk interdependence and funk nationalism. It argues that Funkadelic's One Nation Under a Groove was indicative of a pinnacle for both funk as a form of music and a movement. Essentially, this is one of the major anthems of the funk movement. In case people have never heard of the funk movement, I'm pretty sure they've heard One Nation Under a Groove. And if they haven't heard it before, I bet they will now. Pull that one up. One Nation Under a Groove by Funkadelic.
Are you ready to dive deep into the rich histories, cultures, and arts of Africa and the African diaspora? At the Center for African and African American Studies, affectionately known as The Cause, we're leading the way in research, arts, and student engagement at the University of Colorado, Boulder. The Cause is more than just a research center. It's a space where students, faculty, artists, allies, and activists come together to explore African and African American experiences, from historical legacies to modern cultural expressions. And at the heart of it all, our students, playing a central role in everything we do. They're the future of this important cultural legacy, working side by side with faculty on groundbreaking projects and events that impact not just the campus, but the community and wider world. Research projects and events that impact not just our beloved CU campus, but the community and world at large.
Our mission? To foster academic excellence, social responsibility, and artistic expression, with programs that inspire leadership and advocacy for social justice. Whether you're interested in visual arts, music, or deepening your understanding of African American culture, The Cause is the place for you.
But we can't do it alone. The Cause relies on the generous support of our community to continue making a difference. By giving to the Center for African and African American Studies, you help us expand research, create opportunities for artists, support our students, and drive meaningful social change. And right now, your gift will go even further. All donations will be matched by CU Boulder Chancellor Justin Swartz for up to $1 million or until May 30th, 2026. To make your impact today, visit colorado.edu/center/cause and click on Support the Cause. Every contribution, large or small, brings us closer to a future of unity, knowledge, and transformation.
So, if you're looking for a community where history, culture, and creativity converge, visit the Center for African and African American Studies at CU Boulder. Come join The Cause and be a part of a movement for unity, knowledge, and social change.
Learn more and give today at colorado.edu/center/cause. We can't wait to welcome you to The Cause.
All right, so now we go into the second part of the book, and this is something where I feel like as an author, I'm trying to make a serious intervention into what is called funk studies and even critical funk studies. Now, you may ask, what makes it critical? What makes it critical is adding an intersectional lens to it. I'm really big on what is called intersectional musicology. So in the second part of the book, it really focuses on Black feminist funk. Black feminist funk. So funk isn't just about James Brown, Sly Stone, and George Clinton. Check this out. Chapter 6. The personal is political. The Black women's liberation movement. This chapter demonstrates that funk music and the funk movement extended beyond and reflected much more than the machismo protest politics of the Black Power movement. In the era when James Brown, Sly Stone, and George Clinton were widely hailed as the kings of funk, several female funksters made groundbreaking contributions to funk music and the funk movement, and arguably none more than Chaka Khan and Betty Davis. Funk women's music was insurgently created at the intersection of the Black male-dominated Black Power movement and the white women-centered women's liberation movement. So notice their music was created at an intersection. Hence, it's intersectional. I'm breaking it down. Consequently, funk women's work was a musical emblem of Black feminism and African American women's refusal to be exploited and marginalized within either the Black Power movement, or the women's liberation movement. To understand funk women's music, it is important to go beyond the Black Power movement and the women's liberation movement and examine the distinct history of the Black women developed and Black women-centered movement of the 1960s and 1970s, the Black women's liberation movement. There simply is no way to adequately understand funk women's music, and especially Chaka Khan and Betty Davis's music, without ample attention being given to the Black women's liberation movement. This chapter essentially answers the question, what is the Black women's liberation movement? It offers an overview of the Black women's liberation movement and the ways it converged with and diverged from the Black Power movement, the women's liberation movement, and the sexual revolution of the 1970s, among other movements of the late 1960s and 1970s. So the Black women's liberation movement is something that I was so preoccupied with. This book, The Funk Movement, is a sequel to a book called Black Women's Liberation Movement Music, written, of course, by me. But it was a way that I wanted to turn some attention to the fact that there are many women who felt marginalized even within the mainstream women's liberation movement of the late 1960s and the 1970s. So there are a lot of BIPOC women who didn't feel like that movement, the women's liberation movement, really represented them, their views, their values, and everything. And so what I'm saying is that African-American women actually provided a soundtrack to basically an alternative women's liberation movement. And so, again, the African-American branch of that is going to be called the Black Women's Liberation Movement. And my book is called Black Women's Liberation Movement Music, subtitle Soul Sisters, Black Feminist Funksters, and Afro Disco Divas. So I'm looking at women's soul music, their funk music, and their disco music as a triad of soundtracks to this essentially unsung, pun intended, this unsung women's liberation movement, the Black women's liberation movement. Let's talk a little bit more about folks who helped with the Black feminist funk soundtrack of the Black women's liberation movement. Chapter 7, I'm Every Woman. Subtitle, Chaka Khan, Jazzy, Soulful, Sensual Funk, and the Black feminist funk movement. So basically, this chapter opens with a brief herstory. Herstory, of course, instead of his story. Holla, y'all. This chapter opens with a brief herstory of women's funk music before giving way to a discussion of passionate vocalist and conservatory-trained pianist Maxine Lewis as a musical precursor to Chaka Khan. So most people know about Chaka Khan, but they don't know about the Chaka Khan's musical idol, Maxine Lewis. Next, I take on Chaka Khan's biography, her early love of music, and budding racial and gender consciousness as a member of the Black Panther Party. After scuffling on the Chicago music scene for several years, Khan's big break came when she joined the interracial funk band Rufus. Her Rufus years are considered a major turning point in her life and career, and even though she was the only woman in the band, this chapter illustrates that she sang a series of women-centered funk songs that broadened the funk aesthetic and nodded to the Black women's liberation movement. It is argued that a form of what I call Black musical feminism free floats through Chaka Khan's songs such as I'm a Woman, I'm a Backbone, Right is Right, Sweet Thing, and of course, her crossover funky disco hit, I'm Every Woman. The chapter ends with a focus on Chaka Khan's nonconformity, her funky erotics, and her Black feminist funk rebellion. So it's almost as if Chaka Khan remixed the funk aesthetic. She she brought the funk aesthetic into dialogue with the black feminist aesthetic. Talk about intersectionality. Chapter 8, Nasty Girl. Betty Davis, Erotic Funk Rock, and the Black Feminist Funk Movement. This chapter exposes readers to the life and musical legacy of Betty Davis, one of the most colorful figures in the herstory of funk. Again, herstory as opposed to his story. After a discussion of her upbringing in Durham, North Carolina, and then her relocation to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, her move to New York City as a teenager, then I explore her modeling career and her whirlwind romance and brief marriage to jazz icon Miles Davis. This chapter centers on her work as a nonconformist, sexually liberated black feminist funk singer-songwriter. You heard that correctly, a funk singer-songwriter. Betty Davis's work is explored as a form of radical, erotic funk rock because of her irreverence toward whiteness, maleness, white feminism, taboos around sexuality, black music, white music, women's music, rock music, and even funk music. For me, Betty Davis helps us call into question all of those things. And this is what a lot of women during the women's lib movement and the sexual revolution, this is what they was listening to. The chapter argues that her music, sometimes directly and at other times indirectly, reflects and expresses elements of the ethos, meaning the culture of the black women's liberation movement. Discussion is given to Davis's trademark emphasis on artistic autonomy, women's liberation, and sexual revolution, as well as her challenge to those who seek to silence women's speech about sex. The chapter closes by highlighting the backlash against and the disdain for Betty Davis's music by white patriarchs, white feminists, and even the black bourgeoisie. Ultimately, Betty Davis's music demonstrates that not only is the personal political, but the musical is political as well. Her love songs and what she calls her anti-love songs doubled as political songs and protest songs precisely because of their disregard for and outright antagonism toward conventional racial, gender, sexual, and musical rules and regulations. Yo, when we get to Betty Davis, there would be no Madonna without Betty Davis. There would be no Megan Thee Stallion. There would be no Michelle Indigo-Cello. There would be no, there's so many of them that literally are the daughters, the funky daughters of Betty Davis. There would be no Mary J. Blige without Betty Davis. There would be no Georgia Ann Muldrow. I'm just saying, like, some people don't know the root. They don't know the her story. They might know some of his story, but I think that what this book offers is not simply a his story of funk. I'm also offering an alternate her story of funk. Holla if you hear me. So then we go into the third part of the book, which is neo-funk. So essentially exploring rap music as a new form of funk music. Chapter 9, P-Funk to G-Funk, subtitled, From Funk Music and the Funk Movement to Rap Music and the Hip-Hop Movement. The ninth and final chapter investigates funk's enormous influence on the origins and evolution of rap music and hip-hop culture. Basically, rap is reassessed as part of the funk continuum, which in its modern form can be traced all the way back to the dirty blues of the 1930s, the suggestive jump blues of the 1940s, and the risque rhythm and blues of the 1950s, and it continues to be found in contemporary gangster rap and hardcore hip-hop culture. The chapter begins with an exploration of the roots of rap in the classic funk of James Brown, Sly Stone, and George Clinton. From James Brown's proto-rapping about the ongoing harsh realities African Americans faced in the post-civil rights movement period, and numerous samples on songs such as Eric B. and Rakim's Move the Crowd, Public Enemy's Fight the Power, NWA's 100 Miles and Runnin', Ice Cube's Jackin' for Beats, and Salt and Pepper's Do You Want Me? Among many others. To the way Sly and the Family Stone was revered and heavily sampled on rap classics such as Arrested Development's Grammy Award-winning People Every Day, Eazy-E's Easy Does It, Public Enemy's Fight the Power, Stetsasonics talking all that jazz, Ice Cube's Horny Little Devil, and Das Effect's Mike Checker, among many others. And then we also exploring the roots of classic funk with P-Funk, particularly George Clinton and Parliament Funkadelic's music, influencing and serving as a bohemian, lyrical, and funky beat basis for gangsta funk, a.k.a. G-Funk, and other rap songs such as De La Soul's Me, Myself, and I, Outkast's Elevators, the DOC's Beautiful But Deadly, Salt and Pepper's He's Gamin' on You, Ice Cube's Doing Dumb, SHIT, Public Enemy's Bring the Noise, and Tupac Shakur's Immortal, Holla If You Hear Me. After guiding readers through the shift from funk rap to gangster rap, next, the chapter examines the ways early rap carried over the funk aesthetic as a rebellious repudiation of the West's concept of formality. Moreover, it is argued that the funk aesthetic served as the foundation for the emergence of the ghetto, gangster, N-word, pimp, HO, thug theme, prevalent in gangster rap and hardcore hip-hop culture. The chapter and the book conclude with a critical discussion of gangster rappers as artists and gangster rap as a hip-hop movement style form of funk-based rebellion. Consequently, the funk movement ends, much like it began, by emphasizing that funk historically has been and currently continues to be more than a form of music. It is a movement, a distinct multi-form of music, aesthetics, politics, social vision, and cultural rebellion that has been remixed and continues to influence contemporary Black popular music and contemporary Black popular culture, especially rap music and the hip-hop movement. So a special part of the Cause podcast will be the poetic pause. I believe that poetry is a special way that humanity expresses itself. And one of the reasons I believe that is because even poor people can write poetry. And so it's not just the bourgeois, it's not just the academics and the intellectual. Folk poetry, street poetry. I mean, just think about that. Poetry, much like jazz, is an incredibly democratic form. So throughout this podcast series, we will be having poetic pauses where we just have a little pause to express ourselves poetically. And in this way, I also kind of want to model that, you don't have to go and take 50 classes and get a PhD in poetry in order to express yourself poetically. So here we go, our very, very first poetic pause. And this, of course, is connected to my book called The Funk Movement. The title of this poem is We People Who Are Darker Than Blue. Subtitle, A Blues Funk Poem. It could be argued that the origins of funk can be traced back to the Middle Passage, the horrific 3-month voyages from Africa across the Atlantic Ocean that took place between the 16th and the 19th century, where an estimated 132 million to 165 million enslaved Africans were shackled and chained, treated inhumanly, and treacherously transported in the hull of so-called slave ships en route to the Americas. Only 1 out of 12 enslaved Africans who entered those ships of horror and hell walked out of them alive on the other side of the Atlantic, which is to say, only an estimated 12 million to 15 million suffering souls survived the Middle Passage. It was down in the odorous and ghastly depths of the so-called slave ships, surrounded by the stench of defecation, disease, and death, that funk, not merely funk music, but funk culture, funk as a movement and a form of rebellion against the established order, was born. There are historical reports that reveal that enslaved Africans sang songs during the months-long Middle Passage voyage. They sang songs from the various cultures from whence they came, and they created new songs about their despair deep in the hull of the ships. They used their shackles and chains to create all kinds of rhythmic patterns, a plethora of polyrhythms, by clanking their manacles together and against the wood boards and beams of the ship. A potpourri of rhythm reverberated from iron beating against iron and iron beating against wood. This was the first funk music, the melancholic music of the Middle Passage, and echoes of this music free floats through not merely our music, but our lives and struggles today. Our outer darkness covers us like a cloak, and Curtis Mayfield referred to us as we people who are darker than blue. Yes, blues people. Here is another one, another poem in honor of you. They do not know who we are or who we have the potential to become. Finger popping, hair locking, jaywalking, more than half of us never get a chance to see the sun. We people who are darker than blue, hear me now, because I'm talking to you. I often think of the ancestors, those who died and those who survived, those who endured unspeakable hurts and horrors, and those who were brutalized and died while they were still alive. The blues and the funk mixes with red dirt and black blood, slave castles, doors of no return, and middle passages, buzzwords for things we do not know about. Slavery, whips, shackles, chains, and they have merely moved them from our feet and placed them on our brains. And I can hear Bob Marley solemnly singing, "Oh, pirates, yes, they rabbi, sold I to the merchant ships, minutes after they took I from the bottomless pits, but my hands were made strong by the hand of the Almighty. We forward in this generation triumphantly. Won't you help me sing these songs of freedom? 'Cause all I'll ever have, redemption songs, redemption songs. I said, redemption songs. Emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. In time, we must free our minds. Listening to Funkadelics, free your mind, and your ASS will follow. Inside, many of us feel so empty, so funky, so numb, so hollow. But this is not a song of freedom. Not another ode to the way we wish the world was. No! This is a spoken song, mouth music about the here and now. About Trayvon Martin and Tamir Rice. About Sandra Bland and Breonna Taylor. About Eric Garner and Michael Brown. About crime and crack cocaine. About the prison industrial complex and substandard schools. About ghettos and barrios. About Africa in America. No, this is not a freedom song. It is a funk song. Song of remembrance that gives voice to some of the things our ancestors might have said had they lived to see where we are now and who we are now, 21st century funk. I often think of the ancestors, those who died and those who survived, those who endured unspeakable hurts and horrors, and those who were brutalized and died while they were still alive. Every night we kneel and humbly pray, and every day, century after century, more bloody black bodies are carried away, black bodies drenched in the pathos and pain of the blues and the funk, black bodies, blue black bodies. They have been used and abused and abused and abused. Mass graves fill the seabed of the Atlantic Ocean. Bone bridges crisscross the ocean's floor. We went through doors of no return, no return, no return. And the hard, sun-scorched, sweat-drenched earth where they toiled cries out. The spirits of the unburied, enslaved ancestors who did not make it through the Middle Passage summon us. I'm so glad trouble don't last always. I'm so glad Harriet Tubman was not willing to accept the world the way it was. She speaks to us, and when we listen, Rosa Parks from the front to the back of the bus. Blue black people, those whom the world has for centuries forsaken. Ooh, blue black people, those whom the world has for centuries ridiculed, robbed, and mistaken. Our outer darkness covers us like a cloak, and Curtis Mayfield referred to us as we people who are darker than blue. Beautiful blues people, here is another one, another poem, a toned poem, a spoken song, mouth music in honor of you. They do not know who we are or who we have the potential to become. Finger popping, hair locking, jaywalking, more than half of us never get a chance to see the sun. Ooh, we people who are darker than blue, hear me now because, ooh, I really am talking. I'm singing. I'm saying something special to you and you and you. This is what we call the breakdown. And in fact, we're going to remix the breakdown based on the funk aesthetic. So this is a funky breakdown today. One of the things that we want to do is to just share some of this music. And we're going to start with some of the classics. So if you don't have in your collection, on your streaming list, some of this funk by James Brown, please go out there and listen to Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud, and place it in the context. When you actually read the book, The Funk Movement, you will see that what I do is develop like a politics of music and a sociology of music, a history of music, so that you can understand music is a text. And we need to understand the context in order to adequately and properly interpret the music. So Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud came out at a time when African Americans were still called Negroes. They were still being called colored people. And so James Brown embracing blackness, that was a big thing. So go out there. If you don't do anything else, you don't listen to one single other song by James Brown, please listen to Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. Another one, again, this is the funk remix of the breakdown. Go out there and listen and get an album by Sly and the Family Stone called There's a Riot Going On. This is an incredible album because you're going to see elements of psychedelic funk. You're going to hear psychedelia creep in there where Sly Stone begins to sort of mumble some of his lyrics because he's so, out there flying high through the friendly skies. He's going to slur some words, but at the same time, you're going to hear a theme of paranoia creep in to his music. And was it really paranoia? Some people in the Black Panther Party were saying, because they were locking up so many Panthers, they were raiding so many Panther headquarters, and everybody knows that Sly and the Family Stone were in the Bay Area, and that's where the Panthers was. So Sly was actually having conversations with members of the Black Panther Party at the time, and some of that vibe is also in this album called There's a Riot Going On. And in fact, I want to share with you. There's a Riot Going On came out essentially as a response to Marvin Gaye's What's Going On. So it's almost as if Sly Stone musically answered Marvin Gaye. So Marvin Gaye said, "What's going on?" Sly Stone said, "There's a riot going on, brother. This is America. This is the early 1970s. And in Black America, there's a riot going on." And if you actually go back and look, there were lots of different cultural rebellions and urban rebellions happening from coast to coast. Next one, The Breakdown, the funk remix. Go back and get an album by Funkadelic called One Nation Under a Groove. Some people don't realize that what I'm calling the funk movement was also called the Black Rock movement. This was a way where African Americans felt like they were going to rescue and reclaim rock music. At that time, a lot of the most iconic rock artists were white males, right? And again, I'm shouting out Joni Mitchell, who I have everything Joni Mitchell has ever put out there. I just have a love affair with Joni Mitchell, and so did Prince. I love Joan Baez, right? I mean, there's so many of them that were doing such incredible work. Let me shout out Dusty Springfield. Some people already know how I feel about White Chocolate, Dusty Springfield, doing it to you in your eardrum. But anyway, so with Parliament Funkadelic, particularly we're talking about the Funkadelic album. If you were to ask me one album by Funkadelic that, I really recommend, it would be One Nation Under a Groove. And the album by Parliament that I would recommend would be called Mothership Connection. Sweet Chariot, Mothership, swing down and let us ride. Black folk felt like life was so bad in America in the 1970s. They wanted a spaceship to come and land and take us to another planet, another world. And so also in funk music, you can hear elements of escapism, of fantasy, of play. And even poor black people, they wanted to escape a little bit too, which is why the Mothership Connection by Parliament went platinum. Holla. We move on from there to Chaka Khan, arguably the greatest female funk singer of the classic funk era. Chaka Khan, if you haven't heard it, Chaka Khan produced not only this incredible song called Tell Me Something Good, which was written specifically for her by Stevie Wonder, one of her musical idols, but she also put out this incredible song, which she co-wrote. So again, this whole notion of a funk singer-songwriter called Sweet Thing. And so it's almost like a funk ballad. Again, it's still up-tempo, it's still funky, but it's a ballad because funk connected black love with black liberation. Funk was a way that we sought to get free. So if you can't physically get free, can we musically get free? Which is why funk was like a critique of the American music industry to a certain extent. Funk represents the African-American avant-garde, our black bohemian culture in the 1970s. And Chaka Khan, if you look at the way that she was dressing, if you look at that mane, that beautiful red mane of hair that she is known for, if you look at the way that she puckered her lips, Chaka Khan, a lot of the way that she presented herself challenged the politics of respectability. It challenged the way that women were supposed to dress and sing and perform. So again, if you actually look at Chaka Khan, she kind of deconstructs a lot of what a lot of the white female singer-songwriters were doing in the 1970s. Chaka Khan, please check out Tell Me Something Good. Please check out Sweet Thing. And then, of course, what became one of the last great anthems of the women's liberation movement, I'm Every Woman. This song becomes so iconic, so anthemic that Whitney Houston covers the song, right, and gets a hit record out of it, I believe in the early 90s. It might have been 92, might have been 93. And she actually has, at the end of the song, as she's ad-libbing, she ends the song by saying, Chaka Khan, right? I'm every woman. Woo. And then she said, Chaka Khan, right? And I was just like, yo, it was really, really incredible. As we know, Mary J. Blige loves Chaka Khan. There would be no MJB, my girl, Mary J. Blige, if there had not have been Chaka Khan. And Mary J. Blige has covered Sweet Thing among other Chaka Khan songs. We also see here that Chaka Khan directly influenced what is called hip-hop soul or neo-soul music. That, again, a lot of this for me is neo-funk. We need to sort of really, really talk about the way funk has influenced rap music, but also hip hop soul music, neo soul music with an artist like Mary J. Blige or Georgia Ann Muldrow, or obviously somebody I went to high school with, Erykah Badu. Lastly, Nasty Gal by Betty Davis. Betty Davis, was considered the underground queen of funk. So if Shaka Khan, in the book, I argue that Shaka Khan is the commercial queen of funk. So the underground queen of funk would be Betty Davis. Her records may not have sold as much, but people who know funk, they know Betty Davis because she's the real deal. Her bands were often composed of members from the Grateful Dead, members from Sly and the Family Stone band, member from Santana's band, Jimi Hendrix's band, Miles Davis's band. I mean, she's got like such an incredible mix of A-list musicians playing on most of her albums, and she creates a sound all her own. But she also, there's a deeper interface with the sexual revolution of the 1970s in Betty Davis's music, and it got her in a lot of trouble. So please go out and pick up Betty Davis's Nasty Gal album, but also her album called They Say I'm Different. I mean, you can even see from the title. We're talking about Black Bohemia. Also on this breakdown, I've already shouted out some of the neo-funk rap songs, what I call funk rap. If you look at rap music in the late 1980s throughout the 1990s, a lot of the samples were funk samples. They argue that James Brown is one of the most sampled artists in the history of sampling because of rap music. Sly Stone is one of the most sampled artists in the history because of rap music and hip hop culture. So again, that's why I'm arguing that a lot of rap music is neo-funk, or should be called funk rap, and everything. And so there's so many of those artists who show up in a lot of this music. In terms of the breakdown, this is the funk rap remix. So anybody sort of really, really looking at the way James Brown influenced rap music, just please listen to Eric B. and Rakim's Move the Crowd. Listen to Public Enemy's Fight the Power, NWA's 100 Miles and Running, Ice Cube's Jackin' for Beats, and Salt and Pepper's Do You Want Me? If you want to sort of see Sly and the Family Stone's influence on rap music and hip hop culture, particularly rap music, obviously we have to start with Arrested Development's Grammy Award winning People Every Day. We all know that it samples Sly Stone's Everyday People. So, the hip hopper just inverted it. Hip hop is famous for remixing and inverting. Eazy-E's Easy Does It samples Sly Stone. Public Enemy's Fight the Power, Stetsasonics talking all that jazz. So you can see a nod to jazz rap as well. Obviously, I want to shout out one of my very favorite groups, the legendary Roots Crew from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, arguably the greatest jazz rap group of all time. Ice Cube's Horny Little Devil sample Sly Stone, and Das Effect's Mic Checker also sample Sly Stone. When it comes to P-Funk, George Clinton and Parliament Funkadelic, obviously, the very first song that comes to mind for most people would be De La Soul's Me, Myself, and I. Me, Myself, and I. Outkast's Elevators. The D.O.C. from Dallas, Texas. The D.O.C.'s Beautiful But Deadly. Salt and Pepper's He's Gaming on You. Ice Cube's Doing Dumb S-H-I-T. I Came to Bless You and Not Curse You. Public Enemy's Bring the Noise. And of course, last but certainly not least, Tupac Shakur's Immortal. Holla if you hear me. This has been The Breakdown, and we just did the funk remix. And after we did the funk remix, we did the funk rap remix. In terms of this call to action, here's the conclusion to the call to action. One of the things about the funk movement is that I'm connecting a black protest movement to black popular music. Call to action. Do that today. Some of the students in my Black Lives Matter movement class, I challenged them. I gave them a charge to go out there and find BLM-themed music. It's all around us. There's a lot of music that is influenced by what's going on right here, right now. Music is so much more than music. And if I was to give you a $5, a $20 word, we call it extra musical. So music for many of us isn't merely music. It's so much more. It's one of the ways that we critique, that we protest, that we offer up our social commentary. It's one of the ways that we decolonize, right? That we challenge the music industry. So please go out there and listen to some music or find some music that you feel like is really connected to a great cause and to a great movement right here, right now, in the 21st century. All right, so I want to close out by saying thank you so much for listening to the Cause Podcast. I want to remind you that we would love to hear from you. Please send us in your questions, your comments. Let us know which causes are really important to you, right? That is the theme of this show, that we want to make sure that everybody out there is raising their consciousness and committing to a great cause. Please check out our show notes where you can get a full playlist from a lot of the media that was mentioned in the show, from books to music to poems. It's all going to be available there for you. Thank you so much. And you can email us. So your questions and your comments, you can email us at thecause@gmail.com. And when we say the cause, that is going to be THECAAS@gmail.com. I repeat, THECAAS@gmail.com. That is 3 A's. All right. So it's the acronym for the Center for African and African American Studies at the University of Colorado, Boulder.
Thank you for joining us for the Cause Podcast with Dr. Reiland Rabaka. If you'd like to contact Dr. Rabaka or the Center for African and African American Studies, email cause, CAAAS, @colorado.edu. For your letters, questions, and suggestions regarding the podcast, email us, thecause@gmail.com, CAAAS. We may even read your letter on the air. The Cause Podcast with Dr. Reiland Rabaka is produced and edited by John Arnold and is a production of the Center for African and African American Studies, The Cause, at the University of Colorado, Boulder. For more information, visit us online at colorado.edu/center/cause, CAAAS.
Class is in session, so come and get your lesson. Ooh, the Cause Podcast. I love that. Do you love that?